Welcome to Consulting Mastery, where we help B2B consultants master the business of consulting. I'm Carrie.
And I'm Ahmed. Join us as we explore the art of delivering outstanding client value, earning a higher income, and thriving in today's marketplace. Fortunately, in my line of work, I get to talk to a lot of smart people, present company included. And I had a refreshing conversation with a new client that's coming into the 90-day pipeline in the next week or so. And he said to me, he loves consulting. He's been consulting for years. The pipeline's dried up. Never heard that before, right? Referrals aren't coming in like they used to. It's just the deals aren't landing. And no outward deliberate marketing or business development to speak of. Again, haven't heard that before. But now he's starting to feel the pain of it. And so he considered, well, do I go out and get a job? Do I go back into the workforce? And actually went and interviewed with a number of companies and just wasn't feeling right. What he realized was he would feel trapped in those roles, especially after the last few years of independent consulting, which have felt freeing and liberating in many ways, different clients, different projects, not tied down to one organization. Because the problem is, what I came to realize is the main risk to my consulting business is the ups and downs in revenue, what we call the revenue roller coaster. When I'm really, really busy, I'm really, really busy and I'm turning work away. And when I'm not busy, I'm really not busy. Like I'm scrounging for opportunities. And if I could smooth out that roller coaster, consulting is great. Like there's only upside, interesting clients, interesting work. I choose who I work with. I set my fees. I make better money. I'm not tied down to one organization. I don't have a boss. Everything is beautiful if I could solve this one problem to smooth out that revenue cycle, that revenue curve, if you will. And I just thought, boy, I wish more people came to such a sound, logical conclusion.
Well, it's so fascinating, right? Because this isn't an uncommon scenario for folks that we talk to, even some folks in the program, right? They're sort of coming in, testing their ability to get their consulting business off the ground and having consistent income so that they don't, quote, have to go back to a job. But the thing I just want to point out, and this might be a little bit of an off-ramp, is it's about trade-offs. And you listed all of the things that come with having a consultancy, being an independent business person, right? Being an entrepreneur. And there are some things that feel like downsides, which is the lack of, consistency, or the perceived lack of consistency, or the difficulty in getting to consistency. But what's really interesting is how much attention folks put into that particular quote unquote downside versus the other downsides that come from being employed, having a job, going down another path. And so I just say that because I think it can be a knee-jerk reaction to one problem, right? One specific problem that you have in your business. And because it may not be the thing that you have the experience in, right? It's not the skill set about which you're an expert. It's sometimes far too easy to say, well, that's not going to be something I can solve. I'm just going to go down this other path where there's a gigantic list of things I don't like, but I don't have to solve the one thing. And so one of the things that we often do is just right size how much of a problem, if you want to call it that really is relative to everything else that you need to do in your business. And also just be really clear with folks that it's a very solvable problem. It's not, this mysterious challenge that has no answer. It is something that is, can be systematically approached and resolved in a way that you just kind of don't think about it that way anymore.
And I understand why people struggle with it. So let's get into,
yes,
why don't more folks, likely you listening, why haven't you arrived at this conclusion yet for yourself? Well, I think it's a few things. One is we're kind of hardwired to prefer certainty and safety, especially if you have, for the most of your career, been in an employment setting where you got a paycheck every month and your pay didn't fluctuate month over month. It was the same every month and it went up year over year, right? Every year your pay went up and to the right and there was little fluctuation. You got used to that. You got used to the steady paycheck. And then you start consulting and all of a sudden, you have a good quarter and you have a bad quarter. You have a good year, you have a bad year. A lot of folks are feeling the bad year right now, right? The down year. Made $1 million last year, down to a couple $100,000 this year. I've heard that many times already. And the fluctuations and the ups and downs, even if you come out ahead overall, are hard to stomach for people because they want the certainty. And there's probably some misaligned expectations here. And this is a conversation I had with this particular client around, we can smooth out the revenue curve. We can't smooth it out to be like employment. You're not going to make exactly the same amount of money every month and every quarter and every year. Like, there are going to be fluctuations. And yes, we can smooth it out so it's not as drastic and as, emotionally taxing on you, but it will not be as smooth as somebody writing you a paycheck every 2 weeks. And so I think there's this kind of addiction that many people are still getting over. And the longer you're in consulting and in business and independent, the longer you've been doing it, the easier it is to kind of wean yourself off of that addiction. But that addiction is likely still there for a lot of people.
Well, and add to that if you've come from a job, right, from a corporate space, and in that corporate space, you were the person who delivered the solution, right? You were the problem solver. You were the person who served the client, which is often the case. There was a business development function happening, but it was happening somewhere else, right? It was happening behind a closed door. And you probably had the luxury of just criticizing it when it wasn't quite where you needed it to be. And, just presuming that whatever was happening behind that door was doing what it needed to do. And often the business development and the operational structures are separated so much that it does make it feel like something that is mysterious, right? That, only the gigantic marketing department in your gigantic consulting firm can solve. And what we know is that that's not true, but it's, something to get past as well.
And that's perhaps one of the root causes of the other challenge folks have, is they think somebody else has to do it.
Yes.
Perhaps because that's what they experienced in a corporate setting. They didn't do it. Somebody else did, a different department. Maybe we talked to them every now and then, but I don't know what was going on there. And so there's this kind of, implicit assumption that, okay, all right, fine. Maybe I do need to get, some marketing processes in place or some business development processes in place. So, all right, love Dan Sullivan to bits. And I love the book, Who Not How. For those of you who have read it, the big idea is entrepreneurs should be looking for a who to do a thing, not a how to do a thing. But the number of times I've heard that misused, right? Somebody said to me recently, I need a who, not a how. Yeah, well, you can't afford a who. That's a problem. Right? So it's a nice idea if you can afford it, but if you can't afford it, then it's not going to work. A, and B, who's that who? Mm-hmm. For those of you who are listening who have been down the rabbit hole of hiring marketing agencies to drive demand for your consultancy, I've heard that story hundreds of times. Haven't heard a positive one yet. Haven't heard a success story. Or what else are you going to do? You're going to go and hire some slick salesperson? What slick salesperson wants to work for a small consultancy with no validated go-to-market strategy? Slick salespeople work for slick sales organizations that have validated processes where they know they're going to make a lot of money. That's likely not with you right now. So, I think there's this knee-jerk, feeling that, well, I got to get somebody to do it. And if you've been down the path, you probably come to the realization no one's going to do it for you. And then you're kind of left holding the bag.
And this is where we drop a hint to go back to one of our very early episodes. I think it's called I'm Not a Marketer. And talks exactly about this. And we won't go into it in as great a depth today, but why that statement is just, categorically not true, especially when you are launching and trying to get your business to the phase of growth that you're looking for.
Yeah. And I think the thing that I really want to drive home with folks is we're talking about one major downside to running a consulting business. And it's the one that I hear the most often. I haven't heard many other complaints. Most other consultants are quite content when things are going well and they have revenue. They might be busy and there's ways to solve that problem, but I don't hear many complaints about it. The number one complaint is revenue's up and down. It's a roller coaster. Sometimes I'm busy, sometimes I'm not. That is the perennial complaint. And I'm not suggesting it's an easy problem to solve. What I am suggesting is that most of you haven't tried to solve it effectively yet. So before you throw in the towel, go get a job, or, well, that is really throwing in the towel, isn't it? Before you do that, you got to ask yourself, have I really given this my best shot? Have I tried to effectively, intelligently solve this problem, or have I been just passing the buck to this agency, that consultant, this salesperson, that marketing intern? Have I truly owned this problem and taken it on myself? Until you do that, I don't know how that you can give up on the path.
And I agree 100%. And I think what can be really challenging about that is it's not so much about the problem. It's rarely about the specific problem. I mean, it is to some degree, of course, you need income, but a lot of what leads people to the place where they're considering throwing in the towel, or they've thrown in the towel, or they've got a bunch of towels that they're throwing around, is that there's a bunch of fear attached to the problem. There is, and it's an outsized fear. So this notion of, income is fluctuating. That's a fact. As you said before, that's always going to be a fact to some degree. You can level it out or even it out to some extent, but there are going to be highs and lows. The question is, what does that do to your brain? How does it make you react? Do you panic? Do you go into problem solving mode? What is it that you do? There is the fear that so many folks go through when they move into this consultancy space, which is, what is everyone else going to think? Right? I said I was going to do this. I made all these big promises, whether it's maybe to my partner or my kids, we're going to go to Disney World next year, and that's not going to be able to happen. Or my uncle who critiques me every time we get together for dinner. What are those people going to say about me? And what does that mean to me internally? And then we've got, folks who, quite frankly, have a bit of a fear of success, right? Who are holding themselves back from really making the leap, taking the jump, doing all the things that need to be done because of something inside of them that's slowing them down, holding them back. And so to me, the first step here is just separating the actual problem, right? The thing we're talking about, the challenge in ensuring that you have a consistent flow of leads and therefore clients into your business, separating that from all this other junk that can lead you to, take a leap in what will inevitably be a wrong direction because you haven't really considered and thought it through.
And sometimes I think you have to just go through a little bit of pain to come to these realizations. Like I know I had a bad experience in an employment setting way back when. And after that experience, I vowed to myself that I would never rely on a single source of income ever again. I just wasn't going to get burned again. And that was the impetus for me to start a business and not rely on a single source of income anymore. A lot of folks now have felt that because they've gotten the layoff, they've gotten the letter, right? They've gotten, they've been made redundant. And it's an interesting market that we're in right now because I think a lot of folks probably would go to employment if they could, but they're not finding anything that's reasonable, that meets their needs, that pays their bills. And so I think right now you have a lot of folks that are in consulting because they don't really see many other options and certainly want to make it work, and they don't really see employment as a viable fallback. And so therefore they're kind of backed into a corner. And I think it's ultimately positive because the folks I feel really bad for, to be honest, is if we acknowledge where we are in the economic cycle, we're near the bottom of a cycle. right? And you could debate the timing of that. Are we at the bottom, near the bottom, or coming out? It doesn't matter, right? But relative to 2022, this is a down year, okay? And so a lot of folks that we talked to did really, really well in 2022, not so well in 2023, worse in 2024. Things will come back up. And the folks that hold out, stay relevant, stay in the market, stay in business, they're going to capitalize on the upswing that comes inevitably whenever it comes. And the folks who tap out and throw in the towel are going to be left watching from the sidelines. And I think that's unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, what this time and place that we're in is also hopefully doing is challenging the societal belief that pervasively kind of, lives within so many of us that employment is stable. And it's not. It can be for a period of time, but if you're the person who gets the letter, you've gone from your consistent, solid, good income to nothing, which is also a huge swing. And so the difference here is knowing that now you're going to be the person who's in control of that, right? Versus the person who is just waiting for the organization to continue to pay you, to keep you employed, to, make the decision to have you be a part of whatever it is that they're doing. And there is something about grabbing on to the agency of not your consulting agency, but your personal agency, and just recognizing that you have more control than you think.
Yeah, the only true stability is internal stability. It's you relying on your skills and your capabilities and your mindset to create demand, to find opportunity, even in an employment context. Frankly, like if you've resigned yourself to being an employee, be good at finding jobs. Like that's another skill altogether, right? But my point is, if you are relying, to your point, on the market and an employer to give you stability, well, there's plenty of examples, perhaps even those personal to you, as to why that is misplaced trust, because the market doesn't care about you. Mm-hmm. Your employer doesn't actually care about you. No one cares about your livelihood more than yourself. So therefore, take matters into your own hands.
Mm-hmm. And certainly we're not here telling everybody that they shouldn't be employed. That's not the case either. For some folks, that is exactly the right move. And to your point, the play there is to be good at getting jobs, keeping jobs, finding the right jobs, doing those things. But we're talking to folks who, for all the reasons that we discussed at the beginning, have decided that that's not their path. And so maybe let's have a little bit of a conversation. We've talked about the roller coaster. We've talked about evening it out. Let's maybe talk about what that looks like.
Well, I've had this happen to clients, right? I've had clients come to us who said, listen, I love consulting, but boy, did I just get a heck of a job offer. And it's a great opportunity. You know what? It could be a career-making move. So I'm going to work on these projects and this and that and the other. And I'm thinking if I spend a year or two here, I will develop so much more know-how and skill and domain expertise and develop some fantastic relationships. It's going to propel my consulting business. I think this is actually the best thing for my consulting business in the medium term. Great. I'm not saying don't do it. I do take issue with this idea that, okay, I'm going to go get a job and then kill my consulting business forever. Well, it doesn't have to be that way. There are times to go out and get a job. And that doesn't mean that your consulting business dies forever. It is something you can come back to. And if in the grand scheme of things you want to be a consultant, I think it's in your best interest to keep that alive, keep that a going concern, even if you do take a job in the interim.
So, lots of discussion about the challenge and how to approach the challenge of this roller coaster of income that so many folks have to deal with. But of course, the question that everyone who's listening is asking, or most of the folks who are dealing with this, is how do I jump off this thing? Right? How do I get off the gigantic roller coaster onto one that's, the kiddie version that has some ups and downs, but doesn't terrify me every time there's a drop?
Fortunately, I have a simple 2-step plan, Carrie.
Excellent.
Step 1, acknowledge that the problem is a skills gap. You have a skills gap. You don't know how to create demand. If you did know how to create demand, you wouldn't have this problem. Therefore, so you acknowledge, and that's a very different problem than how most people are defining it, right? Most people define it as, I don't have lead, I don't have pipeline, I don't have a person to help me, I don't have good marketing, I don't have this, and that may all be true, but at the root of that is you don't have the skills to create demand and create opportunity. You know, a lot of folks say to me, well, listen, once I get in front of somebody, I'm good. Yeah, who isn't? Like, that's not an accomplishment. If you're a good consultant and I get a client in front of you with a problem, you better be good. That's table stakes. I'm not impressed. How do you get them to come to the table is the real task. That's the real challenge. You know, we call that demand generation or creating demand. So that's the skill that you have to personally acquire. Step one is acknowledge that it's a skills problem, because that's going to direct you to a certain type of solution. And step two is find a way to acquire the skills. Now, obviously, 90-day pipeline is designed specifically to help B2B consultants and professional service providers acquire the skills necessary to create and drive demand and revenue. I don't care how you do it. Right? It's not a plug for the program. But if you are an independent consultant, boutique firm, or responsible for generating revenue in a consulting business, and you have to acquire the skills to do so, find a place to go and do that. Find a community, find coaches, find mentors, find courses, find an education on creating demand for a consultancy service. That's ultimately the solution that you need.